I came home from a work trip a day earlier than expected. Nothing dramatic, just a couple of client meetings wrapped quicker than planned. So I figured, why not head back, surprise Joanna, maybe even catch a quiet evening together for once. We hadn't had one of those in a while. The house looked normal enough when I pulled into the driveway. No mystery car parked out front. No strange lights flickering in the windows. But from the second I stepped through the door, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it right away. It was just a shift in the air. Joanna didn't hear me come in at first. I left my bags near the front door and followed the faint rustling sound coming from the study. When I peeked in, she was standing at the desk, surrounded by papers. Some in neat stacks, others more chaotic, as if they'd been rifled through in a hurry. She was so focused she didn't even notice me at first, which was odd. Joanna was always hyper-aware of her surroundings. "Hey!" I said, my voice breaking the silence. She startled, really startled. I watched her hand flinch toward one of the stacks, as if to cover something, then stop halfway. "Garrett, you scared me," she said, laughing it off. "You're back early?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah. Meetings ended ahead of schedule. Thought I'd surprise you." "That's nice," she replied, though her voice sounded tight. She was still shuffling papers, even after I stepped fully into the room. I scanned the mess on the desk. Bills, what looked like her work documents, a half-empty coffee mug, and then I saw it. A folder that had slid partway off the edge of the desk. A rental agreement. I recognized the layout of the standard form, the fine print, and the signature line, and that's when my heart skipped. There was Joanna's name, signed and dated. But there was another name too. A man's name. I didn't recognize it. And there was more. Attached were layout diagrams of a small one-bedroom apartment, notes on paint swatches, and a handwritten receipt confirming a second set of keys had been issued. It was thorough. Too thorough. I picked up the folder before she could stop me. "What's this?" I asked, my tone casual, but my hand was trembling slightly. She paused, eyes flashing with something I couldn't quite place. "Oh, that's just an investment thing. I meant to tell you." She reached for it, but I didn't let go. "A friend of mine is subletting and asked if I wanted in. It's just a side hustle." "Really?" I said, flipping through the pages. "Because it looks like you're the primary tenant. And this other name, he's on the lease too." She hesitated just a moment too long. "Yeah, well, it's more of a co-ownership thing. He found the place and I'm helping finance it. We're going to rent it out to professionals. Airbnb style." I kept my eyes on her. "And when were you planning to mention this?" She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and smiled too quickly. "I didn't think it was a big deal yet. I mean, it's not like I signed away our savings or anything. It's just a starter." I nodded slowly, flipping to the last page again. That date circled even stood out. I remembered it clearly. She told me she had a full-day seminar for work, even complained the night before about having to wear business attire and sit through boring presentations. I'd offered to pack her lunch, and she kissed me on the cheek, called me the best husband ever, and walked out the door before sunrise. But here it was, a lease signed on that same date. Not a contract for a seminar venue. Not even a work receipt. Personal rental agreement. "You said you were at a seminar that day," I said, not accusing, yet but not letting her off easy either. She blinked. "Was I?" "You were," I replied. "You told me you'd be at the downtown Marriott all day." "Oh, right, I forgot," she said, waving her hand as if that detail didn't matter. "I was, but I had a break and ran over to sign some papers. It was all very last minute." "Which part was last minute?" I asked, holding up the architectural layout plan. "The paint color preferences? The floor lamp placement notes? The key handoff?" Her lips tightened. "Garrett, why are you interrogating me? It's just an apartment." I didn't answer right away. I was looking at her now. Not just the words, but the way her arms crossed over her chest. How her breathing picked up ever so slightly. How she couldn't seem to hold my gaze. Joanna, my wife of 7 years, had always been quick-witted, confident, even when she was bluffing. But this wasn't confidence. This was deflection. She stepped forward, gently tugging the papers from my hand. Seriously, babe, you're overthinking it. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to get into a debate about risk and ROI. It's just something I'm trying out. If it doesn't work, I'll pull out. I let her take them. I didn't fight it. I just watched. Okay, I said, my voice flat. You're right. Maybe I'm overthinking. She smiled too fast again. See? It's nothing. You surprised me, that's all. I wasn't expecting you today. Clearly. She walked toward the hallway, tucking the folder under her arm. I'll make some tea. Want anything? I shook my head. No, I'm good. She paused, then disappeared around the corner. I stood there alone, staring at the now empty desk. Something inside me shifted, some quiet, internal ledger started updating itself. I couldn't call her a liar. Not yet. But I also couldn't unsee what I'd seen. It was the kind of moment where something cracks. Just slightly. But enough that you know it'll never quite go back the same. And in the silence of that study, I realized this wasn't about Elise. This wasn't about side hustles or subletting or seminars. This was about something else entirely. Something I wasn't supposed to find. Something she didn't want me to see. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the sheets twisted around me like restraints. Joanna was already asleep, or at least pretending to be, over in the guest room. She said it helped her sleep better, something about her back and how I toss and turn too much. I'd accepted that explanation at face value. We'd laughed about it once, even. But now? Now it felt like a boundary, like a quiet separation that had started long before I noticed. And I started thinking. Replaying moments, rewinding conversations, dragging up pieces of the last few months I had mentally filed away under nothing to worry about. Like how her schedule had changed. She used to be home before me, working on dinner or watching TV with a glass of wine in hand. But lately, she'd been staying late more often. Meetings. Extra responsibilities. That's what she told me. At first, I believed her. I wanted to believe her. She'd even show me calendar invites sometimes, open her laptop casually so I could see the names of coworkers I didn't know. Then there were the yoga classes. That had thrown me. Joanna had never been a fitness class person. She liked walks, maybe a spin bike at home, but group classes? She used to joke that the last time she did yoga, she spent more time giggling than breathing. But a few months ago, she became suddenly serious about it. 3 times a week, like clockwork. She'd leave with a mat slung over her shoulder, hair pulled back, clothes tighter than usual. And she always came back glowing, not just flushed from exercise, but relaxed. Too relaxed. I remember asking her how class went once. She looked startled, like she'd forgotten to rehearse the answer. Then she smiled and said, it's more about the mindfulness than the poses. That answer stuck with me now. It felt like something she'd been told to say. Something she'd practiced. Then there was her phone. That became a thing all on its own. It never left her hand. Even in the bathroom, it was always within reach. Notifications came in, but I never heard them. Her ringer was always on silent. At dinner, she'd keep it face down. She said she was trying to be more present. And that sounded great in theory, except she also started checking it obsessively during those present moments. I caught her once, in the middle of a movie we were watching, glancing down and smiling at something. I asked who it was and she said it was just a group chat about work. I didn't press. I should have pressed. A memory surfaced, one that I hadn't thought about in weeks. I was driving downtown after work, stuck in traffic near 5th and Maple. That's when I saw her. Joanna. Standing outside a sleek black car I didn't recognize. The driver's door was open and a man was sitting behind the wheel, talking to her. She wasn't dressed for yoga or work. She looked polished. Like she was heading somewhere special. I slowed down just enough to watch unnoticed. She leaned into the window, laughed, then touched the guy's arm before walking away. That image wouldn't leave my head. When I asked her about it later that night, carefully, casually, she said it was a rideshare and that she'd gotten dropped off early to grab a smoothie before class. Her explanation was quick, maybe too quick, but I didn't dig. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband. But now? Now I realized I'd been giving her all the benefit of the doubt while she'd been building a world outside of me. Even little things had meaning now. The way she started locking her laptop more often, even just when getting up to grab a drink. Or how she'd laugh at jokes she didn't share with me, texting someone and shaking her head like they had a language I wasn't invited to understand. Her wardrobe shifted too. More fitted. More deliberate. I chalked it up to confidence, self-care, maybe her new yoga lifestyle. But there was a calculated edge to it. Like she was dressing not just for herself but for an audience I hadn't been introduced to. And her scent, God, her scent. It had changed. She started wearing perfume I hadn't smelled before, soft and musky, the kind that lingered on a jacket or in the bathroom long after she'd walked out. I once mentioned liking her old one better. She smiled and said, "This one feels more me now. More her, but not the her I knew." Even the way she looked at me changed. I didn't realize it until I saw it missing. The way she used to look at me like she was already in on the joke, or like she couldn't wait to pull me aside and tell me something only I'd understand. That int asterisk Macy. Those quiet glances we shared across the dinner table or during a party when we were in sync. Those had evaporated. In their place, there was a kind of polite detachment. She was still kind, still present, but she wasn't there. Not really. And now that I was watching for it, I saw it everywhere. I remembered our anniversary dinner from 2 months ago. We went to the same place we'd gone for our 3rd anniversary. A place with white tablecloths, candles, the works. She seemed distracted the entire night. Her phone buzzed once, and she excused herself to the restroom. I waited 15 minutes before she came back, flushed and flustered, muttering something about a client emergency. I laughed it off, joked that we should bill her company for the interruption. She didn't laugh back. She just sipped her wine and changed the subject. I should have known then. Another time, I'd come home early on a Friday. I walked into the house and found her sitting on the living room floor, headphones on, eyes closed, surrounded by candles and notebooks. I asked what she was doing, and she said it was part of a clarity practice she'd learned in yoga. She told me not to disturb her and asked me to come back in 20 minutes. I waited on the porch, confused, until she came out and kissed me like nothing had happened. Clarity practice, right? The more I thought about it, the more it became clear that she hadn't just changed schedules or picked up new hobbies. She had slowly moved into another life, parallel to the one we shared, and I had let her. I'd written off her mood swings, her distance, her odd behavior as stress or restlessness. I had assumed we were just in a phase, one of those plateaus every long-term couple hits. But this wasn't a phase. This was something else. I sat up in bed, staring at the dim glow of the hallway light spilling under the guest room door. That light used to mean nothing. Now it was a barrier between us. A symbol of everything she didn't say, of every detail she kept tucked away in folders and calendar entries I wasn't meant to see. The lease I'd found, signed on the day of the supposed seminar, was just the first breadcrumb. But it made every other moment fall into place like tumblers in a lock. Click. She changed perfumes. Click. She stopped laughing with me. Click. She started going to yoga. Click. She started locking her screens. Click. She smiled at her phone like it knew her better than I did. Each memory wasn't just a standalone suspicion anymore. They formed a pattern. A trail. One I hadn't noticed while walking forward. But now, looking back, it was painfully, unmistakably clear. This wasn't about her needing space. This was about her making room for someone else. And that was a truth I couldn't unknow. By the time the weekend rolled around, I wasn't sleeping much. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and just lie there, staring at the ceiling while Joanna's soft breathing filled the space between us. The silence wasn't comforting anymore. Felt staged. Like everything else in our home, it had turned into a performance. A set piece. I didn't want to be suspicious. God, I didn't want to be that guy. The one scrolling through search results at 2 a.m. or silently watching his partner out of the corner of his eye. I'd always thought people who did that had already lost the battle. That if you felt the need to track or snoop, the relationship was already over. But when you're surrounded by shadows and your gut starts screaming louder than your pride, something changes. Something practical. You stop worrying about being the bad guy and start preparing not to be the last one to know. So I made a decision. A while back, we synced our devices for convenience. Shared calendars, shared playlists, shared storage. It helped when we were planning vacations or grocery lists. I didn't think much of it then. But now it felt like the one thread still connecting me to a version of our life where honesty existed. She rarely used our shared tablet anymore. Said it was too slow. It had mostly become a digital picture frame in the kitchen, looping through old vacation photos and snaps *TS of our dog from years ago. But what she didn't realize, what I remembered, was that the tablet still had autosync enabled for her photo app. So late one night, while she was asleep in the guest room, I turned it on. And there it was. A notification. New photos uploaded. My thumb hovered over the screen, my heart thudding so loud it echoed in my ears. I clicked open the gallery, trying to steady my breathing. At first, I saw nothing unusual. *TS of yoga poses, a flyer from a retreat she'd mentioned months ago, a recipe for some green smoothie she never actually made. But then came the apartment. The apartment from the lease. The one she claimed was an investment. Except this wasn't a listing photo or a walkthrough *T. These were personal. Lived in. One picture showed Joanna barefoot on a thick rug, a glass of wine in her hand, her smile wide and easy. Another showed her sitting cross-legged on a pile of floor pillows, her hair pulled back, wearing an old college hoodie I thought she'd donated years ago. And she wasn't alone. A man sat beside her, one leg stretched toward hers, the two of them surrounded by takeout boxes and open notebooks. He wasn't a stranger, not in the way you'd forget a face. I'd never seen him before, but I recognized the posture, the familiarity, the way he looked at her like she was the whole world and not just a visitor in his space. In another photo, he was behind her on the small apartment balcony, arms around her waist, their faces pressed close, lit by city lights in the background. She wasn't resisting. She was leaning into him, her head tilted back slightly like this was the most natural thing in the world. And in one picture, she was wearing an old t-shirt of mine. One I'd gotten rid of last year after a closet purge. She said she'd dropped it off at Goodwill. It was faded and too big on her, but it used to be mine. Now it was his, by way of her. I stared at that photo for a long time. Long enough for my vision to blur, not from tears exactly, but from something tighter, something deeper. A grief not just for the betrayal but for the version of my life I'd still been trying to believe in. There was no misinterpreting these images. No plausible deniability. This wasn't just emotional closeness or harmless escapism. This was Macy. Real. Physical. Shared. This was a second life. And I wasn't in it. I backed out of the gallery and placed the tablet back on the counter. My hands were shaking, but not from rage. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Not even sad. I just felt hollow. Like someone had drained all the oxygen from the room and I was supposed to keep walking around like nothing had changed. I stood there in the kitchen for what felt like hours, trying to breathe through the weight sitting on my chest, trying to understand how it had come to this. The images didn't just show me the truth. They shattered the illusion I'd been clinging to. The version of Joanna who loved me, the woman I'd fought for, built a life with. That person was no longer here. Maybe she hadn't been for a while. And I finally understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't a crisis of passion. This was a transition. She hadn't stumbled into this. She had constructed it, chosen it. Layer by layer, excuse by excuse, she'd created space for someone else. Physically, emotionally, and now, literally. That rental agreement, that wasn't a mistake. It was a flag planted in new soil. I opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and sat down at the kitchen table. The same table we used to eat at. The one we picked out together because the wood reminded her of her childhood home. I looked around the room at the walls we'd painted, the photos we'd framed. And all I could see were the gaps now. The lies that had slipped between us like fog under a door. She must have thought I wouldn't find out. Or maybe she thought if I did, I'd do what I always did, rationalize it. Give her room. Play the understanding partner who waits while she figures things out. But not this time. I wasn't going to confront her in a flurry of accusations. I wasn't going to raise my voice or storm out dramatically. That would have given her too much power. No, this needed to be clean, precise, measured. I'd learned enough to know the most effective truths are the ones presented without emotion. The ones that don't beg for explanation or redemption. I took out my phone and opened a new folder in my Notes app. Titled it, Clarity. Inside, I started listing dates, timestamps, locations from the photo metadata, little inconsistencies from her stories, a timeline of disconnection. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I wasn't even doing it for leverage. I just needed the truth to be documented somewhere. Something that couldn't be brushed aside by charm or deflection. I went back to the tablet one more time. This time, I exported the photos and sent them to a secure drive I'd set up years ago for work documents. Encrypted, quiet, safe. Then I powered down the device and walked upstairs. She was still asleep in the guest room. The door cracked open slightly. I paused in the hallway, listening to the sound of her breathing. It was slow, even, peaceful. I felt like a stranger in my own house. The woman behind the door had built a new life without me, and I'd been too busy trusting to notice. But I knew now. I knew everything I needed to know. And the next steps? They would be mine to take. The day after I found the photos, everything changed, but only for me. To Joanna, the morning unfolded like any other. She came down in her robe, hair up in a loose bun, scrolling through her phone like nothing in the world was broken. I watched her from across the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. She smiled at me. "Sleep okay?" I returned the smile, even nodded. "Yeah. You." She shrugged. Eventually. It was terrifying how normal she could act. How easily she slid into the rhythm of routine, coffee, toast, checking emails as if the night before hadn't been a turning point. But maybe that's what frightened me most, the realization that the person I was looking at wasn't unaware. She just didn't think I knew. And because she believed that, she was safe. Untouchable. That illusion was about to expire. I didn't confront her. Not then. I didn't ask about the man in the pictures. I didn't accuse her or wave the evidence in her face. I just observed, watched, memorized, and began preparing. There's a strange sort of focus that comes when the heart breaks in silence. I didn't feel chaos. I felt clarity. A purpose. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I wasn't lost in confusion. I wasn't questioning myself. I had answers now. I had proof. And I had the presence of mind to know that confronting her wouldn't give me anything I didn't already have. I needed action, not an argument. That morning, I began gathering everything, every message, every document, every trace of her deception. I wasn't sloppy about it. I didn't go digging through her phone or stalking her locations. I didn't need to. She had already left behind a trail so complete, all I had to do was follow it. I went back through shared calendars, pulling **TS of times she said she was in meetings, cross-referencing them with photos and location data from the sync tablet. There was a consistency to the inconsistency, a pattern of red flags disguised as logistics. It was like she'd been daring me to connect the dots all along. In our joint account, I tracked withdrawals that didn't match any bills or groceries, cash pulled before those late yoga nights. Rideshare receipts that pinged near neighborhoods she had no business being in. I created folders, timestamped everything, labeled each file with a sense of purpose that felt surgical. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it to make sense of the timeline, to regain control. There was something about taking all that chaos and giving it structure that made it bearable. She might have rewritten the rules of our marriage without telling me, but I could at least write the ending. Over the next few days, I staged my own quiet departure. The first thing I did was find a lawyer, not a friend's recommendation or someone local Joanna might recognize, but someone private, discreet, and absolutely no nonsense. I sent an email with the subject line, "Urgent, confidential, no phone calls." We met the following afternoon in a downtown office so minimal it looked like it had been erased of any personal history. Exactly what I needed. I showed her the photos. I laid out the timeline. I spoke calmly with no tremor in my voice. She asked me one question, "Do you want revenge or resolution?" I didn't even hesitate. Resolution. She nodded and handed me a list of things to transfer, to freeze, to protect. We created a plan, an exit strategy. And once it was drafted, I followed it step by step like a blueprint for my sanity. Back home, I started moving things slowly. I didn't pack boxes. I wasn't disappearing overnight. This wasn't that kind of drama. I just began the quiet process of separation, canceling subscriptions, redirecting mail, removing myself from the accounts we no longer needed to share. I changed passwords. Updated beneficiaries. Not with malice, but with a quiet practicality. If Joanna was going to rewrite our story, I was going to reclaim my authorship. And then came the moment I'd been preparing for. I waited until a Thursday evening, one of her scheduled work dinners. She left the house dressed well, the same easy confidence in her step, a spritz of perfume trailing in her wake. She kissed my cheek on the way out. "Don't wait up," she said. I didn't. I moved through the house like a surgeon, pulling together the final threads of my plan. I placed her keys in an envelope. Alongside them, I left a printed note on the kitchen table. Nothing dramatic. No accusations. Just a list of dates. I didn't title it. I didn't need to. Each line was simple. Just a date. And beneath it, a single sentence. April 5th, you said you were at a seminar. April 12th, dinner with coworkers. You never mentioned the receipt from the Westbrook Hotel. April 19th, yoga ended at 7 o'clock. Your Uber left from Grant Street at 10:23. April 26th, that shirt was mine. You said you donated it. There were 10 lines total. 10 pieces of her truth unwrapped. That was all. I didn't include the photos. I didn't need to. I didn't sleep at the house that night. I stayed with a friend across town, someone I hadn't talked to much lately but who understood the weight of silence. I didn't tell him everything. Just said I needed a place for a while. He nodded, no questions asked. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A single message from Joanna. Garrett, please. I don't know what you think you saw, but it's not what it looks like. Please come home. Can we talk? I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. She knew what it looked like. And worse, she knew exactly what it was. Later that day, a second message came. I messed up. I know I did. But you just left? You couldn't even talk to me. Again, I said nothing. Her panic was not my responsibility. Not anymore. I'd spent too long trying to maintain a story that only I was writing in good faith. Now, I was gone. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. I stayed silent for days. I watched from a distance as she tried to maintain her version of the narrative. She posted a photo of her yoga mat, a caption about self-reflection and healing. A few mutual friends reached out confused. I gave them the same answer. We're working through something. I'm giving it space. That was true. I just didn't say whose space I was giving. By the time the legal documents were drafted, I'd already started to feel like myself again. Not the version she remembered. Not the version I had edited for comfort. But the real me, the one who valued clarity over convenience. In the days that followed, Joanna called 3 times. Each one I let ring out. Her voicemails started composed, then turned desperate, then quiet. The last one ended with, I don't know who I am without you. And that, I realized, was the most honest thing she'd said in weeks. She had changed. And in doing so, she had erased the version of us I once believed in. I didn't grieve the marriage that ended. I grieved the one I thought we had. I thought the worst was behind me. After the silence, after the separation, after her voicemails dried up into static, I assumed the story was done. I wasn't expecting answers. I didn't need apologies. I'd stopped looking for meaning in what she'd done. My focus had shifted toward rebuilding, not dramatically, not with a new life Instagram announcement, but with quiet, grounded effort. Waking up without dread. Making coffee for one and liking it. Reclaiming the house I once shared with a ghost version of my wife. But then something strange happened. It started with a message from Erin, a mutual friend, someone more her friend than mine, but friendly enough over the years. The message was brief, almost cautious. Hey, Garrett. I know this is awkward. I didn't want to get in the middle of anything. But I think you deserve to know Joanna's not the only one. I stared at the message for a long time. I typed, what do you mean? Erin replied within minutes. There's a guy. Calls himself a relationship coach. A bunch of women from our yoga group have been going to his sessions. It's weird. He gets them to reevaluate their lives. Joanna mentioned him back when things started shifting. His name's Damon something. Damon. That was the name on the lease. The second signature. I scrolled back through the folder I created during the fallout, my archive of proof, my digital map of betrayal. His name wasn't prominent, but it was there in the fine print. Once. Twice. Then, once you knew to look, it started appearing everywhere. A flyer Joanna had emailed herself with the title Conscious Rebirth Retreat. His name was listed as the lead facilitator. There was a quote beneath it, break patterns by breaking false promises to yourself. It felt like a knife slipped between my ribs. I Googled him. His website was pristine, white backgrounds, black serif fonts, soft jazz playing automatically. There were hedge asterisk TS of him, late 30s, clean-cut but rugged, the kind of guy who wore linen on purpose. Quotes filled the page like graffiti masked his wisdom. Monogamy is a commitment to truth, not ownership. Let go of who they think you are and become who you were always meant to be. Freedom begins with betrayal. That last one made me shut the laptop. At first, I thought it was just some pseudo-spiritual fluff. But the more I dug, the more I saw the pattern emerge. Joanna had talked about reevaluating. She had started using words like alignment and energetic disconnection. Back then, I chalked it up to yoga lingo. But now it all sounded rehearsed. Like she was reading from a script. A few days later, I met up with Erin in person. She didn't mince words. He's like a cult leader without the compound, she said. They go to his retreats for a weekend and come back, different. Less married. More detached. It's like he teaches them how to walk away. Walk away from what? Everything, she said. Jobs, relationships, names. I'm serious, one of the girls legally changed hers. Another left her husband and moved across the country. Joanna was obsessed with his teachings for a while. I sat there in the cafe, coffee untouched, a deep ache settling in my chest. Not grief. Not even betrayal. It was the realization that Joanna hadn't just fallen for a person. She'd been recruited into a philosophy. Damon wasn't just the other man. He was the architect of her departure. Everything made more sense now. The lease wasn't a love nest, it was a sanctuary. The guest room, the yoga, the clarity sessions, all part of a process she'd been coached through. One where the end goal wasn't conflict or healing. It was escape. And he'd helped her build the exit. I went back through our shared memories with new eyes. The first time she mentioned emotional sovereignty, I'd laughed. She got defensive. She said I wasn't open to her growth. I remember asking, growth from what, and she didn't answer. Now I knew why. It was never about us. It was about her becoming someone else entirely. Later that week, I got another message, this time from Paul, an old acquaintance from our couple's circle. His wife, Jenna, had also been attending Damon's retreats. Paul and I weren't close, but what he told me left me numb. She came back and told me she needed a new emotional container, Paul said. I thought she was talking about therapy. But no. She moved out a week later. Said our marriage was built on outdated monogamy. Garrett, this guy's dangerous. We swapped notes. Turns out Damon's retreats weren't just group exercises and journaling. They were structured transformations. Emotional fasting. Silence immersion. Practices designed to separate participants from their old identities. Partners were labeled as legacy entanglements. Relationships were reframed as obstacles to clarity. Joanna hadn't cheated in the traditional sense. She'd been unhooked, rescripted, and the man she'd done it with wasn't some charming stranger, he was a guide through the dismantling of our life. I didn't confront Damon. I didn't contact him. What would I say? You stole my wife? He'd probably nod and say something like, she was never yours to begin with. So I kept my distance. But I watched. From the sidelines, I tracked his socials. His following was small but intense. The same dozen women commenting on every post. Joanna was one of them. She'd liked a post that read, you can't heal in the same container you were wounded. I stared at that like it was a punchline. She loved her home. Said it made her feel safe. We designed it together. Painted the rooms. Chose the furniture. I remember how proud she was of the reading nook in the corner of the living room. Now that space, that memory, was labeled a wound. Funny how easy it is to rewrite the past when someone hands you the pen. One night, I drove by the apartment she leased. I didn't go in. I didn't even stop the car. I just wanted to see it for myself. It was on the edge of the city, above a small boutique, windows lit with warm yellow light. Through the glass, I saw her silhouette barefoot wrapped in a shawl, seated cross-legged on the floor. He was there too. They were laughing, eating something off the same plate. That image burned into me, not because of the betrayal, but because of how at ease they looked. How formed. Like this wasn't new. Like I was the leftover. I drove home that night not in anger, but in resignation. Joanna had chosen someone who gave her language for detachment, structure for disappearance. And as much as it hurt, I couldn't deny the power in that. She hadn't been stolen. She'd been shaped. And she liked who she'd become. But me? I was still putting pieces back together. Not just the fragments of a broken marriage, but the mirror of myself that had been warped by her gradual undoing. And as I stood in my kitchen, the tablet now tucked in a drawer, the list of dates still sitting under a magnet on the fridge, I realized something deeply liberating. Her story wasn't mine to finish. And Damon? He wasn't my enemy. He was just the catalyst. The storm that revealed how much of my life had already been drifting. It had been just over a month since I left the house. Since the night I laid everything on the kitchen table and walked away from the life I thought was mine. In that time, Joanna hadn't reached out again, not directly. She'd slipped into a curated silence, one filled with motivational quotes, vague updates, and filtered photos of brunches and meditation spaces. And then came the charity gala. It was an annual event hosted by my company. I debated whether to go. Wasn't sure I had the energy to smile and nod my way through awkward small talk. But something told me I needed to. Not to make a statement, not to send a message, but to reclaim a piece of the world that hadn't been shaped by her departure. I arrived in a charcoal suit, alone but composed. I practiced the small talk in the mirror, worn the cologne she never liked. I felt lighter than I had in months. Then I saw her, Joanna, across the room, wearing a wine-colored dress and a look of breezy confidence. And by her side was him, Damon. He wasn't introduced as a date. He was supporting her nonprofit, a conveniently professional label for someone whose hand lingered on her back far longer than casual allowed. We didn't speak. We didn't even make eye contact. But we saw each other, and that was enough. Later that evening, the host invited couples on stage for a symbolic unity gesture, an annual tradition where each pair placed a ribbon into a shared sculpture, a metaphor for community, for connection. Joanna stepped back, clearly unprepared. Damon looked at her, unsure. She didn't move, so I did. I walked up to the stage, calm, unhurried, alone. I placed my ribbon in the sculpture and nodded at the crowd. No explanations, no pointed words, just presence. The room shifted. Whispers buzzed. Some understood, some didn't. Joanna turned away before I caught her expression. Damon stayed frozen for a moment, his professional mask faltering. That night, I didn't need closure. I had confirmation. The image they had tried to project, enlightened, whole, above the drama, cracked in the spotlight of reality. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. I stopped keeping track, not of days or events, but of her. Her posts, her apartment, the man she'd chosen to be her mirror. It wasn't a conscious decision. I just lost interest. The tension in my chest that had followed me for months finally lifted. Slowly at first, then all at once. I could breathe in my own space again. Mornings weren't filled with questions or lists or surveillance. They were just mornings, quiet, undemanding. I started eating breakfast alone, in the sunroom we used to share. There was peace in the solitude. Not the kind you rush to fill, but the kind you grow into. There were no apps syncing schedules, no yoga mats by the door. Just coffee, toast, and silence. I didn't rush into dating. I wasn't looking for a distraction. But one evening at a bookstore downtown, I met someone. We struck up a conversation in the philosophy section of all places. She had a calmness about her, unpracticed, unpolished, just real. There were no declarations, no curated revelations, just two people talking. We've gone on a few walks since. There's nothing defined yet, and maybe that's the point. For the first time in a long time, I'm not building a future on expectations. I'm not fixing anything. I'm not being fixed. I'm just here, and that's enough.